Hi, this week we're going to talk about social engineering and why it works. There's a theory that there are 6 reasons why social engineer works, and we're going to go through each of these in this lecture today. Misplaced trust, our respect for authority, our desire to be helpful, motivations to comply, lack of personal responsibility, not wanting to be involved in something that may not directly affect them, and our lack of awareness in social engineering scams that occur around us. So, trust. One of the first things that you have to ask is, are you the person you say you are? When somebody comes up to you, how do you know that that is the person that they said they are? So, for example, I received a call from my specialty pharmacy and they were going to send out my medicine. I didn't know it was my specialty pharmacy. There was nothing to identify that phone number as my specialty pharmacy. And the person just started to ask me my name, my birth date, my address, other information, my credit card number. And I'm like, whoa, how do I know you are who you are? So, understanding when we get a phone call or something, who the people are behind the virtual wall that we don't see is very important. Trusting is something that we want to do. Science has shown that we want to be able to trust people. It's what we do. So, what are some ways that we trust? Well, one of the ways we trust or we develop a trust is if the people are in our group. So, for example, people that you might work with, they're in your group. You are assuming that somebody else vetted them, that they have some kind of credentials. Somebody could be in your group simply because you go to a meeting and you're all dressed in a very similar way. You could be in your group because you listen to similar music, so you feel like you share common values. That in group is one source of how we develop our trust for others. Another way that we trust people is through this model of it's called the SPICE model. And the SPICE model was developed by Kevin Dutton, a psychologist, and he identified 5 triggers which help people instantly trust you. And the 5 triggers are part of what they call the DNA persuasion, in that it makes a person sufficiently persuasive and compelling to be instantly trustworthy. So these things to become instantly trustworthy include things like simple language, direct rhetoric, perceived self-interest. They let the other person think that he or she is that pleasing that person is what's important to them. Incongruity, they use distraction or something unexpected to throw people off course to get them to go along with whatever they want. Confidence, they make their request in a very confident manner. And empathy, they make it personal, so people want to be part of that. Those are the characteristics. In addition, we trust people because we're willing to take risks. So there was a study that was done of which people were given 10 that were divided into 2 groups. And in these 2 groups, one group of people were considered to be the decision makers, and the other group were part of the decision makers team. And the rules were that the decision maker was given $10 just to show up. Each player was given $10. And the rules were that for every dollar sent, it would be tripled by the experimenter before it reached the second player, who must then decide how much to keep and how much to send back. So the hypothesis was that the first player wouldn't trust the second because she'd assume that the second player would keep the entire amount of money and send no money back. But that's not what happened. And instead, the first player sent more than $5, and about 1/3 of the second players reciprocated by sending back more than that original amount. So the results of this imply that a certain amount of trust between strangers existed in playing the game. So to trust someone, you must accept a certain level of risk that they might betray you. So this risk-taking is something that we're willing to do when we give somebody the benefit of the doubt. So truth wizards are people, in general, we want to trust people. We want to believe in them. But there are people who are able to understand or be able to better predict whether somebody is lying or not. And these things that they look at include inconsistency of emotions, maybe odd choice of words. They couch their words very carefully so that you can't really tell what they mean. They use nondescript words. Inconsistencies of their fact, inconsistencies in their personality, the way they might be one way at one time and then, totally different personality the second time. And then something called micro expressions, which is an expression that at the very last fraction of a conversation, it might go unnoticed. Like you might notice an intonation change at the very end of something. And this is very important because although trust isn't critical, we begin the process of lying at a very early age. So there was a study that was done at the University of Waterloo to observe children. And they found that a four-year-old tells a lie once every 2 hours. And a 6-year-old tells a lie once every hour and a half. So this behavior to lie is something that we began as a very young child. And some studies show that up to 25% of our daily interaction involves some type of a lie or a misconception. Like possibly your boss will ask, when are you going to finish that report? And you're going to say it's almost done, but in the reality, you haven't even started it. So understanding when somebody is telling the truth and understanding when somebody is telling something misleading can be identified just through looking at these 5 truth wizards, as we call them. Now, personal characteristics is another way that we identify whether we're going to trust somebody or not. I mean, we look at things like eyes, voice, gender, vocal pitch, for example. Lower voices are considered more trustworthy and more intelligent. Gender. People are more likely to trust people of the same sex. However, females scored slightly higher on the trust scale overall. Regional accents. Accents in general are regarded as not being very trustworthy. But if you are in an area and everybody's talking with a South Carolina accent and you're talking with a Boston accent, you're going to be regarded as less trustworthy in that region. Okay. Eye color. This one is interesting. People with brown eyes appear more trustworthy than people with blue eyes. And it was because brown eye color is associated with a stronger perception of trustiness within the entire face. And men with wider faces are trusted less. And we trust women who smile more than those that don't. And we can tell if somebody is giving us a fake smile, we don't trust them. And lastly, attractive people are perceived to be more trustworthy than unattractive people. So, in addition to how we look and whether they're part of our group, another reason we trust people is our respect for authority. If a police officer comes to our door and they show us a badge, we're more likely to comply or believe what that person says than if just some random person comes who we don't have any idea. And one of the things that was done is people in positions make a difference. So there was something called the Milgram experiment. And this experiment was an experiment that involved a teacher, a learner, and somebody in a lab coat. And the teacher was supposed to give the learner was in one room and was strapped to some type of a device that could give a shock. And the teacher was in another room. And the shock ranged from 15 volts to up to 450. So the teacher saw this and saw exactly what it was. And the learner was given a list of words to learn, and the teacher was required to test the learner by naming a word and asking the learner to recall its word pairing from a list of 4 choices. Every time the learner made a mistake, the teacher was required to administer an electric shock. And it would increase by 15 volts every time the learner made a mistake. Good thing we don't do that here. So if the teacher refused to deliver an electric shock, the person in the lab coat would tell the teacher, please continue, please go on. The experiment requires that you continue. It's essential that you continue. One of those things. If at any point the teacher asked the learner if the learner would suffer permanent physical harm, they were told, although the shocks may be painful, there is no permanent tissue damage, so please go on. And if the teacher pointed out that it appeared the learner wanted to halt the experiment, they were told, whether the learner likes it or not, you must go on until the learner has learned all the pairs correctly, so please go on. The experiment finished when either the teacher wanted to stop after all 4 of the verbal requests were given, or the maximum of 450 voltage was administered. Now, there really wasn't any voltage at all, by the way. The result of this was participants delivered up to 300 volts, with almost 2/3 administering the highest level of 450. So even though they were fearful they could be hurting the learner, 2/3 went to the very top. Milgram concluded that the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of authority constitutes the chief finding of this study. So this further substantiates that trust for authority increases our compliance. Okay, and so there's some other factors that increase our tendency to obey, and the legitimacy of the authority obviously is one of them. But we're more likely to obey if we're by ourselves, if we don't have a group with us, this social isolation. Gradual commitment. We're more likely to obey. We start small, but as the requests get bigger and bigger, it's kind of like we've already gone on this path, and that also increases our tendency to obey. And then justifying the cause. People are more likely to obey when they believe they are serving a justifiable cause. So those authority has a real impact on our ability to increase trust. And some indicators of authority are obviously uniforms, money. The Kardashians might be an example of social wealth, of fashion, but they are some type of authority. Physical attributes, strong people, attitude and confidence. You know, you're more likely to act to like or follow somebody if they appear like they are in charge, so you don't want to challenge them. And their voice and their vocabulary affect us. If they're strong in how they talk about, or even threatening sometimes, we're more likely to follow them. So those are indicators of why we trust. And helpfulness is another one. We want to be helpful. People like to help others. We feel compelled to help others, even strangers, particularly if it's in the work environment. So if somebody comes to you and says, listen, I need to get at this information. I don't have access to this file, but I'm doing this report. Can you just send me that file? Because you know how difficult it is to go through IT to get that security changed. You're probably going to do it. They might be in your group. You work with them. They've been vetted. They told you their problem. You want to be helpful. But in doing that, you've also then just been social engineered to give data that that person did not legitimately have access to, whether it was because of a mistake or whether it was because intentional. So social scientists believe that the altruism, which is our desire to help people, is part of our human nature. And that desire to help is another reason why social engineering works. So, what are the motivators for social engineers? How do we get, as a social engineer, what are the things that they do? Well, one of them clearly is reciprocity. So, somebody gives you something, maybe they tell you a compliment, and they say, "Oh, geez, that's a really nice hairdo you have today," or that's kind of lame what I just said. They might say something like, "Hey, that's a great picture of your kid on the desk. He must be a great baseball player." And then you say, "Yeah, he plays baseball." You talk about it. And then he says, "Listen, can you help me? I need access to this, or I need to be able to go into the computer room," or whatever it might be. Reciprocity. You feel because of that comment about the child, you have a more willingness to help this guy out. Quid pro quo, as we say. Another reason is fear of negative consequences. You get an email from, or it appears to be an email from the CFO that says, "Hey, you need to wire this money for our CEO who's going to Bangladesh next week, and they need to have money in this particular account to be able to work with our vendor over there. And if you don't, we're going to have a big problem." So fear of negative consequences or personal negative consequences is another reason. Pressuring the victim. You know, "I need this done. I need this done now. I can't wait for it. I'm not sure what's taking you so long." Another way social engineers are able to get things done. "I need this done now. Just give it to me and I can move forward, and you don't have to be involved." And then the fourth reason, which is most common for like physical type of events, like for example, you're at your company picnic and you see somebody that you don't know, but you don't know, you're thinking, "Well, I don't know this guy. Maybe he's with somebody. I'm not sure." So you just don't want to get involved. You say, "No, he doesn't belong here. Somebody else will get involved." So just not wanting to get involved is another reason. So there's actually something called the bystander effect that says, ask the question, will you take action? And people are less likely to take any action if they're with a group, which is interesting enough. So they did this experiment of somebody in, I think, New York City, and they had this person lay down on the ground and have a seizure. And when the person was alone, 85% of the time, the person went to the person on the ground having a seizure. But when they were with a group of 5 or more, only 30% of the individuals took any action. And that's because they're thinking it's not their job to take action. They want to diffuse this responsibility to somebody else. And there's this entire concept with this bystander effect of, the presence of others creates a diffusion of responsibility. So that impacts their ability. People are less likely to take action in the presence of others because they feel less responsible for helping somebody if more people are present. And people familiar with this concept know that if ever there is an emergency situation, for example, someone at your train collapses, you're supposed to pick one individual to take the action. So as this experiment clearly shows, the presence of other people lowers the chance of other people intervening and taking action in a crowd. And the second factor in the bystander effect is we look to others for guidance in ambiguous situations. So if no one else is doing anything, we assume that there's nothing that needs to be done. And this is called the pluralistic ignorance. If nobody's doing anything, it must be okay. So that whole group mentality takes over in a situation. And there's 5 stages that occur when a bystander encounters events. They notice the event, and they can do something or they could not. They realize there's an emergency, and they can do something or not. They can assume responsibility, or they cannot. They might know what to do, or they can find out what to do, or they can take action. So the whole concept is that the bystander effect is, will you take action? Do you look for guidance before you do something? So why is that important? That's important because social engineering relies on people just not taking any action if they see something is going wrong. If they see an unknown person going into the computer room, if they're by themselves, they're more likely to confront the person. But if they're with a group of people, the chances of them confronting the person going into the computer room are less. So why do social engineering attacks work? Well, first of all, it's a lack of awareness of what is a social engineering attack. Social engineering attacks began in the 1990s in AOL when the first phishing attack started. In that instance, people got an email. They were asked to give some credit card information. And that was the first time anybody had ever had any type of attack before. Some people say, I don't care if I get socially engineered. What do I have to lose? But you have a lot to lose. You have your identity to lose. And then the question is, what do I do if somebody's having socially engineering me? They don't know what course of action to take. And this is one of the reasons why good security policies and training and awareness are so important. Because if your staff knows what to do in a social engineering situation, they're more likely to deal with it. But if they don't know what to do, they're kind of left to their own devices. So people think it'll never happen to them. They think that they won't fall for some kind of social engineering scam or a con artist. They think they're smarter than them. But these social engineering attacks are becoming more personalized. People are spending more time to craft something that's personal to you so that you would react. Maybe you get a phone call that says, hey, listen, your husband is in the hospital. He was in a car accident. We need your credit card to be able to do treatment and to verify insurance. Can you give your credit card for the copay? It plays upon your emotions. So the question of what to do is now very important. So I hope you've enjoyed this chapter. We talked about why social engineering works. We went through the 6 reasons why social engineering is successful. If you